Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 487 of the Constructive Criticism Podcast. I'm your host, Easy, and I am joined by my co-host, a man that I'm really happy to see today, Mason Clark. Dude, I had a full day, and I was just waiting to see your amazing face. I was just like, let's go. This is the thing I'm waiting for. I get to chill with Mason, leader of the Masonites, and just go. Nothing to say?
I had to be free of Pioneer for 1 hour and 10 minutes. The greatest joy anyone could have.
Unfortunately, I do get Mason all to myself today. It's fortunate for me, unfortunate for Abe, who isn't feeling his best. But you gotta take care of yourself first, and we love and miss you, Abe. Speaking of feeling your best, part of that is being always improving. It is a great feeling when you break through on something. Mason, what did you do to be always improving this week?
Yeah, so I've been preparing for the RC this week, like I'm sure lots of our North American listeners have been. And, Spencer, since we've last talked, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday and Thursday, I slept, I coached, I ate, I played Pioneer, did an hour at the gym, and that's all I did. That's all I did for all those days. I was dreaming a copter every day, and my always improving kind of comes from I early on come to some thoughts and opinions on the Amalia combo deck, and I was like kind of lower on it. I basically didn't love the way it played, did do all this work still, it didn't even win, and then it started to do well. And I think it's been very easy to simply just be like, oh, I've already kind of done the work on this, etc. But after having some conversations and listening to people and just making sure to be like, well, I had these opinions and these thoughts, but you're saying counter this. Let me listen to why, and really challenging myself. I was like, okay, I can see enough of where they're talking about. The sideboards kind of look better. Let's give this another run. And ended up in the spot where, I'm still on. There's no deck in Pioneer I'm in love with. But now I feel much better being on this Abzan Merfolk deck, better known as Amalia combo. And so, trying to basically, I guess the TLDR of this is I had conceptions and thoughts. I kind of put this deck in that spot, and then a bunch of new information came, and an open heart, open mind listened, and was convinced that this is actually maybe the thing I should be doing. And as of right now, that's where I'm at.
So. Yeah, I really love that. I think that, on this show many times, I've been the type of person to say oh, you have to convince me I'm wrong. And I don't mean that as I can't be convinced that I'm wrong. I mean that it's hey, I've made an educated guess. I've spent my time to do something. If you can convince me I'm wrong, that's awesome. I love learning new things. And I think that you and I kind of share that mentality sometimes where it is we'll both state our opinions and we'll say what we're thinking, but also if you have something that proves us wrong, that's awesome. That's an opportunity for us to learn, and I think that just hearing you talk about that today exemplifies kind of the point of always improving in a lot of ways.
No, it really sucks too because I had a cool deck I wanted to play. I'll just say it too. I don't really care. I was going to play Mono Green Devotion again. It's actually good. I played it a bunch and worked on it. It's nice, and I was so ready. And I've been playing a bunch of leagues. I ran into a bunch of really strong pro players and moto grinders, and I was just beating the tar out of everybody. And then the Amalia deck stuff just kind of overlaps and hate. I'm like, dang, this deck's just doing the same things better. I got to put down the deck I like for this one. So.
Yeah, funnily enough, I got asked by somebody, they're like, hey, what do you think of Mono Green? And I was like, I'm sure it's still fine. You have 8 elves. It's a rule of the format. I don't think that Karn changes the fact that, you get to be an elf deck in a deck that doesn't have that. In a format that doesn't, have that.
Yeah, I think, Abe mentioned it last week's episode, but he said something to the extent of, the Cavalier Storm engine is still really good, and you just very often can just put a ton of things in play. Lots of decks can't beat that, and it's very easy to put a ton of things in play. Uvanwadadi, transform basically into Crater Hoof and then kill them. Yep. You'd still just have a combo kill. It's just
there was a tournament. There was a tournament that was one where instead of Karn, I don't remember if you remember this. I think I sent you this list. like when Karn was legal, that was 2 Uvaldi's, 2 Vivians, and like that was the change, and they just called it Moose on the Loose, and I was like, I just want to play this deck for the name.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the deck I had for the RC. I had 2 Vivians, an Oddity, and some Nissa who shake the world, and that was my deck. So it's good. What's your always improving moment, Spencer?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm really proud of the success that Team CCMTG had back in the day with with me, Quentin, Michael, all those Pro Tour Day 2s for just this small little Utah team, right? We got Bronze Pros, Silver Pros. But one thing that I think that I was never really great at is during this time, right, where you'd be like, you're testing for RCs, you're testing for RCQs or Pro Tours or things. I think that I often was too strong on my opinion, when a lot of times all people really need are for you to listen so that they can explain their thoughts, and then you can challenge if it's like absurd, like, no, you shouldn't do that, like here's some real legitimate reasons why you shouldn't do this thing that you're saying. But one thing that I've learned in Magic, probably mostly over like the last 5 years, is that people play a lot better Magic when they're happy and when they enjoy what they're doing than they do when they feel forced into a decision. So, for example, if you're somebody, I'm going to use Pioneer as an example because I think that there's a clear best deck in Pioneer right now. In Phoenix, I think that's been that way pre-bans. I don't know that that's changed very much, according to the results. But if you don't want to play a cantrip deck, and you don't have fun playing that type of Magic, and you're not going to make good decisions, and you're going to be miserable for 7 rounds day 1 or whatever it is, I don't think that it's the right deck for you to play at something like an RC. So for me, I've been working on being a better teammate and just listening and understanding, like, okay, what are your goals? What are your wants? And then being a soundboard and, somebody that reasonably can tell them, like, I don't think that's true, or I think that makes a lot of sense. And I won't say, like, the specific conversation because I don't have permission to do so for this one, but I do think that, like, that's something that I needed to mature and be better at. I'm not qualified for this RC. My entire stake in this tournament is my three teammates going to it. And so, to me, like, their success is not a reflection on me outside of, like, did they have fun? Did they achieve their goals? And was I helping them doing so? And if I'm like, no, you should play this deck, it's the best deck, like, jamming it down their throats, it's going to be a lot less fun experience for them. And I just have found that Magic players play a lot worse in those situations.
Yeah, it's kind of why, like, I mean, I hate playing Phoenix, but, like, I've played it at the last 2 RCs, and I felt really good about it. And, qualified for the Pro Tour as one of them. But, like, I don't try to think about what's fun or not. I try to focus on other things, right? And I try to find the fun in things, right? So it's like, what is fun about this? What can I enjoy?
Yeah.
Because I think feeling forced or negative, can spiral for some people.
Yeah. And I just want to be clear that I'm not saying, like, any of the, like, I still want them to be reasonable deck gamers. I still want them to, like, do what they're going to do. But, like, if you, like, I'll give you an example. One of the players believes that this format is ripe for a combo deck to do well, and they want to play a combo deck. And, like, they think that the combos are split enough where the hate cards are going to be split enough that combo will succeed. And so, to them it becomes about X, Y, and Z, and, throwing in questions like, okay, well, these 2 combo decks both are in trouble to this card. And so there will be a lot of this card. So if you're going to play a combo deck, you want it to be good against this card. Otherwise, you're just falling into the same hate as other people, right? And that's what I mean by being the soundboard, right? My job is to let them express themselves and ask questions rather than state my opinion, do this thing.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's important.
If you want to be a part of the always improving community in our Discord, well, the best way to do that is become a patron of $5 or more. Head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. One of the great ways to improve on Arena is to use our sponsor at Untapped.GG. This week I posted a screenshot with my deck list, with in a what's the play in our Discord. On Arena I use Untapped GG, and I think they're a great resource. If only people could play Pioneer to get their testing in and use that resource today. That's not a jab at Untapped, by the way. That's a jab elsewhere. So. That is going to do for housekeeping. Let's dive into the main topic. We want to talk about how our opponents can interact this week. So, kind of a new little part that I want to add to the show that I think will help listeners as we get into main topics is kind of talk about the idea of the topic. What are we trying to achieve for you, the listener, and what do we hope that you're going to try to get out of this? And we want to take this episode to help you think about ways that your opponent might be able to interact with you in a given format. From whether it be these are the rules of engagement in the format. Like, here are the actual things that need to die. Like I need to be able to kill a Sheoldred, for example. Like, that's a rule of engagement. So, like, what does that look like? To understanding the parameters of any given format outside of rules of engagement. So, like, what turns do I need to play around? Things like that. Anything you want to add kind of before we dive in, Mason?
Well, no, I think you kind of covered it. And, I think it's something that is sometimes hard to think about. Well, I should say this. It is a hard idea, I think, to have from nowhere. But once kind of shown, it makes a ton of sense, right? Like, oh, these things are strong, so maybe I can't do this. Or vice versa. Because these things are strong, I can, right? Like you mentioned with your teammate with the RC.
So one of the things that we're going to use today is, shocker to people, because we've been using so much Pioneer and Modern examples. We're going to be trying to use Standard as examples as Modern season is over, and we will in a couple weeks be in a Standard format that is the main format that our players will be playing that are listening to the show to try and qualify for their RCs. So just kind of a heads up, that's where we're going to base this. And let's I'm going to go over these top to bottom, Mason, and then let's talk about them individually. But the points that we want to cover today are removal, mass removal, protection, permission, difficulty to deal with, rules of engagement, and unique effects. So I want to start with removal because we did an episode a few weeks ago that we talked a lot about removal packages and rules of engagement. And we used Standard as an example from the RC quite a bit. Standard is in a very interesting position where there are a lot of answers for a lot of things. We've juiced up spells quite a bit, maybe since the last time people played Standard. But additionally, like, the threats are a lot better too. Is there anything that you want to highlight as far as when you're thinking about let's say you play I don't know, let's say that you play a Rafine. What kind of cards are you thinking about when you're deciding whether to play your Rafine?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, cards like Cut Down are pretty important, right? Rafine has Ward 1, but has my opponent been holding up multiple mana? Cut Down's the thing that early game catch Rafine, but once Rafine connives and gets one non-creature spell, gets out of range. Things like Go for the Throat are really big answers for it as well. Those are kind of the main things that jump out to me as okay, what is going on against Rafine? What can be answering it? Leyline Binding, another prominent thing. And then also, which I don't want to lead too much the next thing we'll talk about in a second here, but board wipes, I'm playing my Rafine on turn 3. Am I going to get depopulated on turn 4 or Sunfold on turn 5? These are all things I'm thinking about, but keeping it to the spot removal, it's a lot of okay, let's say my opponent is holding up a Cut Down right now. I could maybe, and they only have a single mana. I can play my Rafine, then attack with my other creature, and they might cut down that to stop the connive value. But if they want to answer the Rafine, they're going to have to let me get a little bit of value. I can kind of spread the love around, and maybe get the Tunic out of cut down. So lots of different things going on, but typically a good standard and good removal spells have costs, like there's a cost benefit to it. And things like, go for the throat, make it so artifacts get stronger, and things like cut down make it so bigger creatures get stronger.
Yeah, I also really like, you highlighted like a bunch of different cards and their costs. And I think that the other thing that we think about when we think about costs is like color requirements, right? So like a black deck might have the easiest and best answer to that Rafine, whereas like, I was just looking over because I wanted to double check. It looks like, the red decks have been switching off on like their big kill spell answer for a while now. And it looks like right now, whichever one it is, they're all going to cost 3 mana. It's not like they have like a 2 mana kill your thing. That means that in order to kill a Rafine for a mono red deck, if my opponent goes Mountain Kunama into a Charming Scoundrel, my Rafine is living till turn 4. There's nothing they can do about it.
Yep, and that's also an important thing to note. Like when it comes to like what's going on, we're talking about like the rules of engagement, how they can interact. That's also game 1 and game 2, right? They could have Lithomantic Barrage for games 2, so Spencer knows he can jam a Rafine on turn 3, and then post board he knows maybe I want to jam this Dinnick, get a little lifelink, a little bait there. Maybe that will get the Lithomantic Barrage. And knowing the difference and why you could slam on game 1 and not slam in game 2 or 3, or at least if you're going to slam it, understanding the risk is a really important part of Standard. So much of Standard is defined by what you are allowed to be doing, and both in regards of cards printed when it comes to threats, but answers to those threats.
Yeah, you mentioned like sweepers, and we actually have a deck in Standard that plays by default 4 in the main, and sometimes more, depending on if they want to farewell you or not, in the ramp deck, right? Like the domain ramp deck. This deck, it's totally fine if you play a Rafine, right? Because the way that it's going to answer it is Sunfall. That is the way that it's going to try to do it, and it's going to try, sometimes it might Leyline Binding instead or things like that. But its default answer is it actually wants you to overcommit. Like it's like, okay, we're either going to hold down the board with a flying creature against this, and we'll talk about unique answers later. That is going to be one that I'm going to highlight, is answering the board with the board. But yeah, let's go into our next segment, which is board sweepers. How do you think about it's so funny, Mason, because we come from very I played during your initial era of Magic, but my initial era of Magic was Day of Judgment was legal. That was just a card we got to play with in Standard. Mm-hmm. And because of that, aggro decks had to be really fast and really powerful. I think about Unearth Red, which was entirely built around the fact that, all right, you can Day of Judgment me, but you're gonna this is a Ball Lightning, Hellspark Elemental, Thunder Break. I don't remember the name of the flying one, the 4/4, but the entire deck was and had Goblin Guide. Oh man, what a deck! That deck could crush Standard. The decks had to be built around that, right? And today we get really powerful 5 and 6 mana sweepers. We may not get not to discount depopulate. That card's pretty good. Brotherhood End, pretty freaking good. We get good sweepers. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting, I was playing a match of Standard the other day where I played against, I want to say a black-red deck, a black-red aggro deck or something. I don't remember. But they bobbed and weaved, and they had Brotherhood End post-board against the opposing aggro decks, and then just flooded the board afterwards. And this was something that was really common. I don't even know that it was really common. It was something that people sometimes did with black-red vampires in Zendikar Standard, where they instead of they would have pyroclasms in their mirror in the aggro mirrors, and then just flood the board with vampires you could never win. And I think sweepers are a really interesting thing in Magic that are so different than other things. Just to go out of standard for a second, like, we just had a format where Supreme Verdict before bannings was really good. Like, Supreme Verdict was actually like at one of its all-time highs in Modern not that long ago. Why are board sweepers so effective in Magic, Mason?
Yeah, because they are some of the few cards that actually gain you actual cards for cards, right? And specifically taking away your opponent's resources and being productive on putting you up. When you Fatal Push, Leyline Binding, go for the throat, something in Standard, right? You get lost it. There's typically some maybe cost or, there's something going on there, but also it's a 1-for-1, right? At its core, and I'm not going up cards. I'm typically going up mana traded, right? And at a certain point, that falls off, happens a lot more in Standard than in other formats. And so, with that in mind, these verdicts, these like board wipes, Supreme Verdict, Sunfall, Depopulate, Wrath of God, these cards catch you up on multiple cards and leave your opponent with low resources. And they are just so powerful and so game warping because having a strong sweeper in your deck means that, creatures have a much bigger liability, and they have to do more when they're in play. Otherwise, the sweeper is going to kind of clean them up, and you're not going to be able to actually catch back up because you're going to be down so many cards. If I play 2 or 3 creatures and all they really did was kind of put you to like 8 or whatever, Spencer, and you cast Wrath of God, it's like, all right, well, I'm down on cards and you're up on cards, and I might get to play the first spell after this, but I'm down so many things and you haven't really used your material, or maybe you used the first couple turns sculpting for this, right? And so that puts us in a really unique place. And that's why, things like the ramp deck play stuff like Topiary Stomper into Wrath, right? Like that lets you go on to turn 4 Wrath, which really changes the dynamic. Obviously, it's a ramp deck too, so like it helps there. But like doing things like that help you get these huge jump starts on these Wrath effects. And that's why, it's so interesting, the ones that see play in the domain deck, right? Because you talk about Farewell is really strong. And if everyone knows it's Farewell, it's like, well, maybe I should play some number of Depopulate, right? Just to have that 4 mana access where, maybe the format's so aggressive, I can't afford to play the other ones. I just have to play Depop and give them that card draw in order to stabilize the board sooner. So the long story short is that Wrath effects just trade hard on cards and put you in a position where you're typically up raw cards and you're putting on very low resources, and are also incredibly challenging to play against early on for players. As you improve and get better at the game, you will improve at playing against Wrath effects. You will start to understand when they're coming, and Standard really helps you learn the skill. But early on, they can be incredibly high skill testing bars. I'm thinking about playing a blue-white deck at the Pioneer RC, in part because Temporary Lockdown is really hard to play against and is really well positioned.
Yeah, I want to let's save that Temporary Lockdown thought for a second, because one of the other interesting things, if we look at Standard, for example, is that Sunfall and Farewell also exile. So one of the things that we haven't highlighted is that, like, sometimes, whether it's, different types of things, sometimes Wrath effects can also deal with hard to deal with threats. That's the reason that I actually wanted to lead on Rafine, right? Is that, okay, so like, I don't want to spend an extra mana to kill this thing. One of the best ways to do that is to get rid of everything so that I don't have to target it specifically. So there's a lot going on in board wipes outside of just, kill my thing, let's move on to the next thing. Each board wipe that they make now is unique, right? Like, I don't know that we're ever going to see Pyroclasm again. That's probably not true. We probably will. But like, that card is not quite as elegant as Brotherhood's End, that is also caring about like Planeswalkers and like, oh, my aggro deck that wants to, or my mid-range deck that wants to play Brotherhood End to deal with creature decks. Now I have to sequence differently because it will also hit my Planeswalkers. And like, that's an interesting dynamic that I think that, as we live in the world that we do of mass removal now, we kind of have to think about. So the next way that opponents can interact is protection. And this comes in many different ways. Whether it be like a straight up protection spell, that gives you protection from a color, whether it be, a a green spell that gives you hexproof, whether it be an enchantment that gives your thing hexproof. There's a lot of different ways that even one of the things that I think that people think about interacting, that I think that stuff like this and stuff like our later segments will help players understand is, if I play a card that neutralizes 2 cards in your hand, I interacted with your deck. Maybe I didn't interact on the stack. Maybe I didn't interact with what's in play, but I did interact with you and how you wanted to play this game. And I think that protection spells do this a lot.
Yeah, protection spells put you in a position where you're able to kind of develop and sort of force your opponent to not really move forward. This happens a lot with like Spell Pierce, typically in formats, and it's something maybe other format players understand as well, of like, I really want to go for this thing here, but it seems so clear to me they have Spell Pierce, or Spell Pierce is so backbreaking, maybe I should buy a turn. And that is interacting with the deck, right? Kind of like what you're saying, Vince, right? Just because I didn't even do something, the threat of it or the way they might play around it might push damage, might buy time, might make them do things in a sequence they don't really want to do. It might open up a different option. All of those things really happen. So protection spells are very important, and typically you'll just see them when they are good, they are very good, and they can be incredibly backbreaking. One we see in Modern right now a lot is Surge of Salvation out of the Hammer decks, right? They were for a while just main decking. I think they still are, things are in flux now, but they're main decking those to have a chance against Fury and Force of Vigor and stuff. And then also, just line up very well against a couple other type of cards. So when a protection spell is strong, it can buy you a lot of space and a lot of time. I think that's something that is often underappreciated, like you mentioned.
I literally was going through my Spirits deck to find the name of the phase spell, and my Spirits deck is so out of date it's not in there. Thank you. I was telling you an anecdote. So slip out the back is a really good example of a thing that serves multiple purposes, and I wanted to cover here, where like it acts as removal in your tempo deck, it acts as protection in your tempo deck, it acts as, it serves many purposes. And I think that's why some of these spells, and like I've added protection to this list. I think that if you're a boomer like me and you saw my list of things that we were talking about today, you'd be like, what is this? Is this just not a permission spell? And I think that we've evolved in Magic. I think we have a whole new category of spell that kind of protects your threat. You talk about Spell Pierce, like the classic one, right? And that one acts as multiple things. It acts as a protection spell and a permission spell. I told a story about how Michael Hinderacher, former host of the show, talked to me about oh my gosh, now I can't remember the name of this card. I need to work on this. The Brave the Elements.
Venerated Loxodon.
No.
Oh, that one too. Yeah. I was there when we talked about Venerated Loxodon as a 1-drop Lord. I remember that one clearly.
Brave the Elements acts as both a protection spell and a Lord spell. And kind of understanding your opponent might have something to interact with you that also might be part of their initial games plan. I mean, I think that there are 2 decks that highlight this heavily in the form of... We're not going to talk about this in Standard very much, because I don't think that outside of... I mean, we could do it if we want to talk about Mono Blue for a second, but, let's do it. Mono Blue in Standard. Boros, Heroic in Pioneer, and Infect in Modern. All utilize this type of card way more than other decks. They're trying to interact with you because they're going to put something into play that you have to deal with. Like, if I don't deal with a Hottie Djinn, I'm gonna die. It's gonna be it will solo me so fast if I don't interact with the heroic spells, or if I try to interact with the heroic spells. Like, it puts a tax on you that other interaction doesn't do in Magic. Anything you want to say more on protection spells before we move on to permission?
No, I think you did a good job wrapping that one up.
Do we want to start with cancel, or do we want to start with Mana Leak?
You're driving the ship, King.
All right. Well, let's start with cancel. What's cancel, Mason?
Cancel is 1 blue counter target spell. we see a lot of these variants in standard formats. You might see dissolve or dissipate or absorb. These are sort of the traditional standard counterspell, typically quite weak, although sometimes if the supporting elements are there, you might see it pop up in real numbers. Up until very recently, Pioneer decks played a lot of absorbs. Now we're seeing some amount of experimentation with cards like Make Disappear, which is the mana leak thing Spencer spoke about. We'll get to in a second. But these are sort of cards that trade one for one and will answer anything from the opponent's deck at kind of a clunky cost. So it doesn't have to be one blue, but that is the traditional variation of this effect.
I just want to say that I'm proud of standard players. I did some quick looks. I believe that there might be actually 0 cancels being played in standard right now. So I want to talk about permission spells, and kind of the evolution of permission spells. And I actually think that while not seeing a ton of play right now, and like the format I think will evolve, where maybe this deck could be good again. I want to talk about Mono Blue and its permission spells, because there was a long time where Mono Blue was good in standard while the format was smaller, and it was really interesting because you could always play a cancel. Like there was a plethora of cancels to be played, but what it did is it tried to figure out whether it be Make Disappear, Negate, Essence Scatter, Essence Capture. It really looked for like what permission spells are important this week, and where do I want to split them up. So permission spells, they're usually blue. Like they're usually blue counter spells that can dictate the pacing of a format. Is kind of the way that Wizards has it now, right? Like Make Disappear is like a really good example of one that sees a ton of play in standard. I think that it is one of the best cards in standard. The card, if you're listening, you haven't played standard in a long time, is 1 in the blue for counter target spell unless opponent plays 2, and then you can sacrifice something to make it copy it. Mason, what does permission do to a format?
It sort of dictates what you can and can't cast up, like open mana. Permission doesn't have to always be blue, but it is typically blue, I would say. And it sort of dictates like what you can and can't cast in these turns. Sometimes like removal in this blur the line, right? But with removal, you have like a strong enter the battlefield effect that negates some of this downside, right? So for example, if I play a creature that says when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and Spencer goes, cut it down. It's like, all right, well, I'm at the same spot of cardboard in hand that I was a second ago, and Spencer is down a piece of cardboard. Now I'm down the mana, but if it wasn't a big exchange, it's not that huge a deal, right? So that's something where removal spells kind of lack. They might kill more things or, not fall off in the late game and be something you can play around, but they're something that has a bit of a downside. These permission spells make it so it's much harder to just sort of slam something. And you have to respect these cards and figure out how you want to work around them, Let's say I have, 8 mana in play, and Spencer has 1 card in hand he's been holding the whole game. I might want to wait till my next turn to play Atraxa so it doesn't get Make Disappeared if I can afford to do that, right? That is something that comes up, and it sort of informs your plays against these blue decks. That's kind of their version of removal.
Yeah, and, it's funny. I talked about pacing, and I think you really covered that as far as Make Disappear goes. But there's also other sides to that, right? Like, the longer you wait, other things might turn live. You think about something like in standard, Disdainful Stroke, or, you wait longer, things like, yes, I did turn off your Mystical Dispute, but at the same time, did I turn on your Mystical Dispute for the rest of my spells? There's a tug and pull that permission spells have these days that I don't think are necessarily true of the removal that we're used to. Next up, I want to talk about difficulty to deal with. So, this episode is about how your opponents interact. And one of the things to think about when you're doing that, we brought up Rafine, but one of the things to think about is like the card type, whether it's a planeswalker, an enchantment, or an artifact, these can sometimes be a little bit more difficult to deal with. One of the cards that saw quite a bit of play right after the bannings, Mason, I don't know if you remember, I think that you and I were both playing a little bit of Standard at this time, was Terra Sunder. Just skyrocketed in play for a hot minute. And I think one of the reasons for that is, like, people did so much stuff. So many people were playing tons of different types of cards to try and figure out this new Standard format. What do you think about when you think about, like, putting a card in your deck because it's difficult to deal with?
Yeah, I think that's something that's underappreciated, and we kind of hinted at earlier when I mentioned, like, oh, because there's this, maybe I played that. That's kind of what we're talking about here. I think Razorlash Transmogrant is the one that I think has been the best example in a little while for me, where, that card is a 3/1 that you can spend black, and a bunch of mana if your opponent doesn't have a bunch of basics in play to bring it back and becomes a 4/2. Well, as a 2-mana 3/1, it walks into Cut Down and all the other non-go for the throat removal spells. And, it's an artifact, so it walks into Terra Sunder immediately, right? You don't have to actually kick the Terra Sunder. And there's some real cost to this. But if your opponents aren't playing those cards and you bring this thing back in the graveyard, it dodges go for the throat, it dodges Cut Down. And if black is the best and most prominent color, like it has been in Standard recently, dropping now a little bit, but before the more recent sets, it was kind of the best thing to be doing. Razorlash Transmogrant was just really hard to kill, really efficient, proactive threat that put your opponent in this position where they're like, dang it, like, I have these removal spells, I'm in the color for removal spells, they don't line up well. Similar thing we said with can't be countered threats. Like Thrun from Phyrexia Albi one is kind of a good example of this. Like, can't be countered, doesn't die on your turn. That thing can just attack with impunity and can't stop being hit the board, and the turn it hits the board, your opponent can't kill it. You can't interact with that. So having something that's hard to interact with is a real benefit to a card. One thing we've seen from the past is, like, enchantments are typically kind of hard to interact with. Well, with Get Lost going on the rise, right, it's kind of like, oh, wow, enchantments are less safe than they have been. There's the Nissa from the black-green deck. There's all these other little things that are, like, adding up. Terra Sunder, like you mentioned, is a card that you still see some amount of play in these sideboards. And it's like, okay, this is actually much harder of a thing to protect. And so maybe this sideboard plan or this card I was playing, because it was just keyword hard to kill, is much harder to kill. So now it moves to something different, and maybe there's some artifact that is not a creature, that kind of sits over there and is much harder, and, you can't abrade it or whatever. So there's a lot of different things to be going on. And I think that's when Standard and Magic's kind of its coolest, when it's kind of like, okay, what should I be playing and why? I'm sort of dodging and dancing around the interaction spells. So to get back to kind of like difficult to deal with, it is sort of just like, at the end of the day, a very underappreciated thing of, like, I am playing this card simply because it is hard to kill and has some benefit. And Rafinha is sort of just like bread and butter, or I guess peanut butter and jelly is a better example of, like, hard to kill, very strong. Yum, 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 yum. And some cards you just have, like, hard to kill, and that's the only reason to play it, and that is valid.
No, speaking of cards that are just, like, hard to kill, or, like, I think that if you've played Standard in the last couple years, you have maybe seen a black 2-drop 3/2. Mason, you know where I'm going with this? It might recur. It might have haste and draw a card every freaking turn for 4 mana.
Oh, Tenacious Underdog.
There we go.
I thought you said black.
I actually was
one black man.
No, I'm sorry. That is black and one.
At first I was like, you're good. I was like, Evolve.
No, I was pretty sure it was your card in the Pick 2 set review, so I wanted you to say it. No, Tenacious Underdog is like, I was a big proponent for a little while of the Golgari deck in this Standard format. I still think that deck's fine. I obviously, did crazy at Worlds recently, but Tenacious Underdog was a card that I just think was an auto-include, at least as a 1-of in the deck, because it gives you another 2-drop, which your deck desperately needs, and it has that hard-to-deal with clause. Like, okay, if I kill it with a kill spell, it's just going to come back and gain them advantage. It is a hard-to-deal with because it is recursive, right? Which we haven't mentioned yet as kind of those hard-to-deal with threats. All of this kind of adds up, before we get into our final thing, about how you can come to rules of engagement. one of the things that comes up in coaching for me a lot, I had a coaching session with one of our patrons actually, where I had them, I was like, I need you to write rules of engagement for this format that we're talking about. And then let's go over them and see like how close you are for like what this means, what this looks like. And a lot of what rules of engagement are come down to these things. How difficult is something to interact with? What turn it does permission spells? What turn do permission spells matter? What type of mass removal is there? What are the rules around basic removal spells in the format? Are there decks that have protection spells that really matter? And when do they matter? And how do they matter? And that helps you come up with the rules of engagement. So if you've ever like listened to this podcast, you've wanted to do the exercise, this podcast, like if you listen to this one again to do that exercise, I think this will be the most helpful to get you to a starting point to writing out rules of engagement for a given format. Anything you want to say on that, Mason? You're muted.
Oh, so I think you nailed it. No notes.
No notes. Let's go. The last thing I want to talk about is unique effects. There are a couple things that I think Standard gives us that even still give us insight into other formats. We've got Witchstalker Frenzy is a card that sees quite a bit of Standard play, whether it be the green-red aggro deck or the mono-red aggro deck. This is a card that is going to take your thing, make it their thing for a little bit. And honestly, it's not the only color that can do this. Blue also has the ability to take your permanents, something that we hadn't talked about. That is a way that people can interact with you. We also didn't talk about combat tricks. Mason, anything you want to say about steel effects before I go off?
I think steel effects are... I mean, we see them a lot actually in Pioneer with the Sacrifice deck, right? Yeah. Like, just claim the Firstborn is incredibly powerful. And these are cards that
Gruul plays a Crone War
actually
too.
Outside... Yeah, Gruul plays a Crone War. That's actually another great point. They are typically game-ending effects when they're good, but they kind of lean towards a certain deck, right? Like, no one plays Claim outside of the Oven deck because you kind of have to have a little extra to work with it. In a Crone War, you kind of lock up the board, get the vehicles to kind of turn into an actual board wipe for your opponent. So you do a little extra work there, but they can be highly impactful and totally underappreciated, I think. I think more decks should play cards like the Crone War. Like, I think Rakdos should consider the Crone War more of the time. And This is just an effect that's incredibly powerful when it is well positioned. Very similar to things that have incidental graveyard hate, right? To use like another older format example real quick, and I'll pass it back to you, is like Agatha Soul Cauldron changes how you can interact, right? Like if Yawgmoth's one of the best decks or Hardened Scales isn't really combined, suddenly my graveyard's a lot more exposed and it becomes much harder to play things like Persist type decks and much easier to play things like Murktide and Dredge and stuff like that, where the graveyard hate is not as effective because it's more about massive cards and less singular cards.
Yeah, I wanna highlight kind of what you said, because we have Lord Skitter in Standard in most decks, Graveyard Trespasser in other decks as incidental graveyard hate, as like ways to interact with different parts of the game. And I think that's we're not going to be able to cover everything in one episode for what it's worth, because there's so many ways to interact in Magic. It's what makes it a great game. So I really love that you kind of gave that example. I mean, we also just missed one. This is just me, writing, my show notes are wrong, but like we haven't even talked about discard yet. And discard is a fantastic way to interact with your opponent with, to disrupt their game plan. And that is totally different from, the things that we've already laid out.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree. Discard is highly impactful.
Kind of to go back to those unique effects that we were talking about. Standard and other formats also might have, things that are that don't really fall great into a category. So, for example, Tasha's Timebinder is seeing the modern rounds and also is seeing the standard rounds, right? Where it's not a permission spell. It's also not a removal. Like where do you place this card, Mace? It's just a unique effect.
It's
right?
a protection spell,
but except for when it's not.
It's a protection spell. No, but it is because like you play it and it gives you a temporary advantage, and if you answer the thing, sometimes this stuff comes back, right? Not always, but in like lots of cases. So, for example, in Modern, if I stop your Cascade, it doesn't matter if my Tausches live or dies, right?
Well, in that case,
but
it was
in Standard, if your shielded
right?
triggers. Well, so yeah, to me, it reads like a protection spell the most in Standard, because I imagine it as things against like Atraxa or Shieldred and those kind of things where they put a trigger on the stack, and then I'm turning your thing into a vanilla 7/7, vanilla 4/5, and when you answer this, you sort of unlock it. Very similar to like if I can beat your Tamio safekeeping, then I kind of turn off your card and invalidate it anyways. That's how I at least see it. I could see arguments for different things. So that's how my mind kind of.
I love it. I love how you're viewing it, and like, you know, there's so many things that we don't have time to mention. We got to wrap this podcast up, but like, you know, there are bounce spells that are, you know, not mentioned here. There are tons of ways to interact with your opponent, and your job is to look at a format, look at the things going on, and both just there are a couple different parts, and this is how I kind of wanted to wrap up this episode. You need to understand these things in deck construction, and then you also need to then execute on that understanding in playing. But I think that a lot of people view it as a one-phase process, right? They view it as, while I am playing the game, I need to think of what my opponent can do. But you also need to take the step before that and say, am I a reasonable deck gamer because of X, Y, and Z? Like Tosh's Tidebinder, can I play Cascade decks right now? I don't know the answer, but I do know that like every deck is playing them in Modern. And what does that mean for the decks that you want to play? It is a question that you have to ask yourself and challenge yourself, like Mason said during his Always Improving segment, of like, what does this mean for me? And that's how you build out rules of engagement. So, anything you want to say about this topic before we kind of jump off, Mason?
No, just to kind of hammer home really quick the point you mentioned, like, people so often don't spend enough time engaging with the deck building and planning part of Magic, because I think it is fun, but less fun on average. Like, that kind of scratches an itch for a certain type of person or a certain type of player, which is totally valid. But if you're wanting to compete at the highest level and do that, much kind of like earlier in the podcast I talked about, sometimes you have to do things that aren't fun. You have to sort of maybe work on this. And maybe that's not the most fun way for you to engage with Magic, but it might be something that is really holding you back because you are walking into things where it's like, oh, wow, all my creatures died to cut down and none of them dodge any of these kill spells in any of the decks. So like my standard deck just loses. Like, what am I doing? Or like, wow, my deck is super clunky. It can't beat a Spell Pierce. What am I doing? I can't beat a Make Disappear. What am I doing? So just take some time to think about that and figure out ways, you know, maybe you can still play your Jund Reanimator deck or whatever, but you try to play more cards that are lower to the ground, or there's something that can punish these sort of cards. And just really think about the whole process and engaging with all of it.
I love it. All right, if you want to support the show directly, one of the best ways to do that is become a patron. Patrons of $5 more get access to our Patreon Discord, where you can ask questions like Mikey, who asks, it didn't work. Well, that's because I know why. Give me your top 5 Christmas movies. Mason?
I don't like Christmas. Die Hard.
Wait a second. Hold on.
Christmas
can we bond for a second? Did you say you don't like Christmas?
No, I don't like Christmas movies.
Oh, never mind. Keep going.
Yeah. Die Hard. We all learned a lot about Spencer just then. Christmas Vacation. What's the BB gun one?
Are you talking about A Christmas Story?
A Christmas Story. Yeah. What a classic! Every year I engage with it.
Just lying.
Iron Man 2. and There Will Be Blood. Those are my top 5 Christmas movies.
I knew you were going to say. I knew you were going to say There Will Be Blood. My number 1 is.
I almost said The Social Network.
All right.
There's a Christmas party at the end.
That's factual.
It's when he says, "I'm coming for everything," and he slams the thing. Christmas movie.
My number 1 is Jack Frost. My number 2 is. It's probably the 2018 Grinch movie. I think it's 2018. My number 3, Die Hard. My number 4, I think this changed as I've become a parent, for what it's worth. I really like the Santa Claus. By the way, I really hate the Santa Claus 2.
Forgot about those movies. I was like, what's the Santa Claus? But Claus.
Yeah, it's spelled differently. Yeah. It's like the whole point of the film.
Yeah. Well, I'm dyslexic. I don't get the plot. Thought this was a safe place for you like me. Got him.
That was really funny. That was the best dyslexia joke I've ever heard. All right, well, I don't remember which one I've said now.
You said Santa Claus, Jack Frost, the Grinch, I think.
And Die Hard.
Die Hard. Yep.
Yeah. Miracle on 34th Street, but the one with Matilda. All right. If you want to tell us your top 5 Christmas movies, the best way to do that is to go to the comments. What would an MTG Christmas movie?
Oh my gosh, I know my actual favorite Christmas movie.
Oh, what is it?
It's Jujutsu Kaisen 0.
All right.
Well, it happens on Christmas. Talk. I'm so stupid.
That's
oh
great.
My gosh, I'm so sorry.
That's great. You can join the conversation by joining the Patreon Discord or the public Discord. We had multiple people join both of them this week. The public Discord, I get some questions about this, is for all of He's a Game Media, whether that's Need to Nerd, or that Smash Through, like all of the podcasts on that network, whatever you're into, that's what the public Discord is for. The Patreon Discord is just for patrons, $5 or more for this show. And then the YouTube comments. We got a great novel of a YouTube comment this week. It's not hard to get your YouTube comment on the show, folks. I just want to say, and for what it's worth, the comments help the show on YouTube more than anything else other than likes. So like, comment, subscribe. That's what they all say. And you're like, why does everyone say this? Why is this so important? And it's just the thing that helps the most. Mason, if people want to find you, though, because, they can't just find you here. You're not just on Constructive Criticism. Where can they find you?
You can find me each and every week here. You can also find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. If you're interested in coaching, you can reach out. I have some availability starting in January. I have a lot of people who are excited for Standard, but have some then. And you can do that via Twitter, once again, which is Mason E. Clark, or my email, which is the same as my Twitter handle, Mason E. Clark, but at gmail.com. Put coaching in the description so that I don't think you're spam. Spencer, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
So you can find me at He's a Game on Twitter. You can find me every month on the Smash Through podcast, every week on the New to Nerd podcast, and starting next year, Mason, every week on Constructive Criticism's YouTube channel, playing Constructive Clash with Matt Klink. A YouTube series to go head to head. And then, I actually just want to thank the people that have come to me for coaching the last couple months. Like, literally, you've saved my butt from not having a job, and it means the world. And it's been really cool, and we've seen a lot of success. I do still have open coaching. The best way to get a hold of me is spencerhowland@gmail.com, but you can reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open at He's a Game. If you want to get a hold of Abe, that is at More Nothings on Twitter, and he is also fantastic, so check him out. Mason, what did you learn on the show this week?
I wanted to quickly say too that Abe and I will be at the RC in Atlanta. I should be there Friday. I haven't a movie doc. I have to do an interview, but I should be there from like noon onward. If you see me, please be like, "Hey, I like the show." Whatever. I'll have swag. And same goes for Abe.
You got to get a misspelled wristband from Mason because those are limited time only.
Those I only have like 300 more.
Yeah, like those are. If you get a misspelled wristband, you got it from Mason, and that's equity right there. Those are misprints. So I like that.
Yeah, but if you see me, feel free to stop. Same for Abe. I know he feels the same way. So I just wanted to sort of quickly get that out of the way. I know some people. I've had people like, "Oh, I didn't want to bother you," or whatever. You're really not a bother. I'd love to talk to you for a second. My biggest takeaway from this week on the show is that you hate Christmas.
I don't want that to be your biggest takeaway. I don't. All right. I feel like I told this. No, it's okay. I do think it's worth talking about. Like, I hate the commercialism of Christmas quite a bit, and it's really as like somebody who's. I think that a lot of people who have lost really close people to them feel this way. Where like you see the commercialism and you're like, I just want this person back. Like, that's all I want. And Christmas was like a time that I spent with somebody very close to me before that I lost them. And so that's the part that I hate about Christmas. Also, I think everybody is coming to the conclusion that we all hate the fact that Thanksgiving doesn't exist. And that, like, 2 weeks before Halloween, Christmas goes out at like all the stores, like decorations and stuff. And it's like, can we finish the thing that we're doing before the next thing?
Wait, do your stores actually do that stuff?
Yes, 100%.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, when it doesn't do it here, which I thought was really interesting. I moved to a smaller town. There was some stuff for like Christmas, but like the interesting thing to me has always been, and this might just be where it's almost assuredly has to be me. That has never been my experience. There's like basically since I've been 11 plus, there has been no like Christmas stuff before Thanksgiving in any area, and really not until like December. Yeah.
Dude, that's why I've literally never been in a Walmart after October 18th that didn't have Christmas out.
To be fair, I don't go to Walmart almost ever. I moved here.
Congratulations.
That might actually just be the problem.
Yeah. I think the thing that I learned the most this week is one that I guess it's really a confirmation. I think that if you're listening to the show and you listen to Mason, one of the things that I hope you took away is like Pioneer is in a very open place. I talked about I think that Phoenix is the best deck because of results, but like that doesn't mean like, oh, play Phoenix or you don't have a reasonable deck. Like, you can be a reasonable deck gamer in a lot of places in Pioneer right now. And I think that there are a lot of people struggling with that, right? They're very used to 3 top decks, 3 decks under that, let's go. And there's just not a clear cut right now.
Yeah, I think this happens every Pioneer RC season where something has caused a big shakeup, whether it was the first big Pioneer tournament in Atlanta last year, right? Or Convoke entering the format last time, and now the bans this time, where like Pioneer just doesn't have the tools to cover everything with your sideboard. And a lot of people don't like that. And it leads to a lot of feeling like I'm doing X or Y, and I lose to Y if I do X, and vice versa, and I think that it caused a lot of strife of like, well, I can't win with anything. There's no one thing to do, which, is to say your point about it being very open is true. Like, it is hard, it is hard to cover everything in a singular deck, and it can lead to us helpless.
It's so funny to me too, because like 6 years ago, that's what everybody loved about Modern. They're like, Modern's the best format, and it's because it's like this. And everybody's like, Modern's the worst format, or Pioneer's the worst format because of this. And it's like, that's what I was saying 6 years ago. This is why I hated Modern.
Yeah, I think my big complaint about Pioneer is that Modern had more decks. That's like at least the one thing it had going. If it was going to be a wasteland, at least make it a wasteland. And here I feel like there are 7 decks that are like all reasonable, and then like another 4 that are okay. And I'm just like, dang.
That's not enough decks for you?
I feel like Old Modern, maybe it's just like my glasses. I feel like Old Modern had like 11 and like 6. You know what I mean? Like it was like double that. But it also had double the card pool.
I'm sorry that we're short, you know. That's so many decks. It's so many.
Yeah, I know, but the trick is that they all kind of play the same too. Like there are a lot of decks where like I personally
I get it. Like it's like there's 3 mid-range decks, 3 combo decks, like, you know.
Yeah, it's
3
like
aggro
I
decks.
bought you know, I have M&Ms and peanut M&Ms, and I have a Hershey's and a white chocolate Hershey's, and you know, and it's like, okay, well, like, you know, they are different, but like they're not. I don't like so that analogy.
Those are so different to me.
Okay, well, they're just like, you know, like kind of like a similar thing. You know what I mean?
So you want my hottest take? Should we end it with the hottest take?
Yeah, hit me.
All right, peanut and M&Ms suck. We'll see you guys all next time with another episode of Constructed Criticism.